coming down the pike. There's one looming in Fulton County, Georgia, but it's actually discussed in this indictment. What do we know about that?
Well, we know that, I believe in Fulton County, they've now said by September 1st they are going to have a decision on whether there's going to be an indictment or not. I think we know that there will most likely be an indictment, especially based on the current federal indictment that Trump is being arraigned on today. One of the counts deals directly with the fact that he tried to, use fake electorals for college for Georgia. And, if this grand jury indicted based on that, you best believe that there's a lot of evidence to that. And I imagine that that information has also been shared with or found by the Fulton County District Attorney's Office. And, they've put barricades up around their courthouse recently. They've been upping their security. I mean, all signs indicate that something is to come. I do think it's important, people keep saying the 4 indictments, the unnamed co-conspirators in this matter. But I do think we are very likely to see a superseding indictment and to see some more people charged.
Wow.
To see, I think this will take a little more of a life on than it is today.
Yeah, these different investigations and indictments, they all kind of play into each other. Like we're talking about this one here, today's, the one that we are sitting here talking about, the 4 felony charges regarding trying to overturn the 2020 election and stop the transfer of power. But there's this whole part about Georgia.
Yes.
And so there could be this case in Georgia. If you think back to other things as well, we also had a civil suit. That was the one regarding Aging Carroll.
Yes.
And sexual abuse and making these mischaracterizations about her, et cetera. And some of the stuff that was in that deposition is now being used in, if you're keeping score at home, another one in Manhattan, which has the 30-plus falsifying business records. Basically, we know this one as the hush money case to Stormy Daniels.
I mean, it really shows that the former president has a pattern of engaging in behavior that is not above board and that is not legal. You hear a lot in the president's speeches, the former president's speeches on his social media, releases saying things to the extent of, I have a First Amendment right. You don't have a First Amendment right to defame somebody. You don't have a First Amendment right to knowingly propagate lies that could affect that go against the Constitution. So, you can't say whatever you want to say. I mean, there are consequences if you break the law, and I think that is what you're seeing here now.
And it looks like we're at this live picture, as of all the time when you have live pictures, will be changing. And so now you can see that first car there is MPD. That's Metropolitan Police. That's basically DC Police if you're watching from somewhere outside of this area. And of course, these other cars that are behind it. Again, another MPD car there. And this is just a busy, every day this is busy around there, but much more so today. Again, we're here. If you're just joining us, you're watching Local News Live. I'm Deborah Alfarone, and I am talking to Peggy Bennett, who is a former federal prosecutor. You can see the picture here. A lot of police officers out there, a lot of security, all because former President Trump is going to be arraigned shortly at a federal courthouse here for his role in trying to overturn the 2020 election. You are also looking right now at protesters, peaceful protesters for sure. Seems like things are pretty calm over there at 333 Constitution Avenue. And there are people who are kind of there to support and other people who are there saying, hey, the whole world is watching. One person had this sign up saying the world is watching. Coup was another word. And funny enough, a woman who I've interviewed many times before at the White House, Nadine Sellers, actually I saw, again, looking at all of these news updates, she was just interviewed by the New York Times, and she's wearing a T-shirt reading Trump indicted. She wanted to talk about accountability, saying no one is above the law. So that's her specific thing that she wanted to make sure people know. When you look at this, you know, what does this bring to mind, Peggy? What do you think today is going to be like?
Well, I mean, I think that what all of these indictments and what the special counsel has said in his statements is basically that one line over and over: nobody is above the law.
Yeah.
This isn't a political prosecution. This is a prosecution to show that you cannot break the law, whether you're the former president of the United States or you're just an average citizen.
Well, even so, it looks like the former president has tried to have his voice heard. Even before his initial appearance today in court, his campaign distributed a multi-page document, and this is from the Washington Post, saying here that he's attacking Special Counsel Jack Smith, who is the person who brought this indictment forth. And, you know, a lot of the same things that you'll hear. You'll hear the words witch hunt. And the quote here specifically is, Jack Smith has conducted a dirty, politically motivated investigation of President Trump to prevent him from winning back the presidency, end quote. And again, this is from the Trump campaign.
Well, I think that is what is so interesting about this indictment, separate from the other indictments that the president is facing, that it is going to be his own allies. People that he trusted, people that he worked with him, people who he thought were in on his conspiracy, who are going to be the ones that are going to prove that he did, in fact, know that he lost the election and that he is, in fact, guilty of these 4 charges that he's currently facing. And, you know, you can say that something, you know, those are not, you know, people on the opposite side of the political spectrum. These are going to be people who worked with him. And so it'll be very interesting to see what his defense to those individuals is, you know, when he's when his attorneys are cross-examining them in court. You know, the Department of Justice appointed a special prosecutor to this so that you wouldn't have this investigation being led by, you know, Merrick Garland, by the Justice Department. So it would be taken sort of a step out,
right,
so that, you know, that it would show that there was not this kind of collusion, or that, you know, that it really was a separate jurisdiction.
Right, that it was objective.
Yes.
It's interesting the former president speaks on, you know, a lot about, you know, being, what's the word I'm looking for here? I'm searching for the word specific. Don't you hate when that happens, people, especially on live TV? People to be loyal to him. That's the word, loyal. And I wonder, because when someone is loyal to him, that's great, but when they are no longer in step with him, yes, you know, then there's an attack on that person.
Absolutely.
I wonder
Look
what's
at
going
Michael Cohen. I mean, a perfect example. I mean, when he was loyal and he did everything that he was somewhat instructed to do, he had attorney's fees paid. He was, you know, a sort of a darling in the Trump world. Yeah. And the second that he did not play ball anymore, he was villainized.
We're looking right here at the White House on the right-hand side, and certainly that's the place that many of these discussions took place. And certainly we do remember on January 6th, that day, absolutely, the former president making a video after a while, after all of the events of January 6th were playing out at the U.S. Capitol.
Well, and that's
that video where it was kind of a non-video.
Well, it's sort of the elephant in the room. All of these different cases that you've talked about and indictments from all over the country, you know, is there ever going to be a connection or a charge dealing with the actual violence that happened on January 6th? Is there going to be an inciting the riot charge? Is there going to be some more direct linkage? Or will the president, you know, will that be part of a superseding indictment? You know, that's a question a lot of people are asking. You've connected a lot of dots, but that's one dot that's still off to the side.
Do you think that dot will end up being dotted?
Like I said, I wouldn't be surprised. I think we have to see what happens with this, if there is a superseding indictment in this case, once people start cooperating with the Justice Department, what information they learn, and, you know, if there is a link, then yes. If there's not a link, then no.
I just wonder, and, you know, I know you don't have a crystal ball. It all really comes down to the infamous speech instructing people to go down to the Capitol and fight like hell. There's many phrases that were used, and can that be directly translated to inciting a riot?
I think there has to be more than that, and we don't know what was going on behind doors. We don't know what kind of if there were directives being given out. We don't know. I mean, there's so much that we don't know, that we're not privy to, that we can't, you know. that really depends on a lot of different factors. Those words alone, with a couple different things, could be inciting a riot. We don't know. I mean, that it's really too difficult to tell without really knowing what was happening around the time those words were being said, and what other people were discussing, what other issues had been brought up, what orders were being given to the police. We don't know any of that information.
Back to this case specifically, though. Yes, we want to know all those other details regarding January 6th and if there could be a possible indictment there. But this one seems pretty weighty to me, just in looking at many of the other things. I mean, certainly classified documents, that's very important as well. But we have never had a president be charged with trying to delay or stop the transfer of power in our country's history.
Well, we've never had a president who allegedly did these activities. I think that is what is so troubling and historic about this indictment, is that this fact pattern has not come up in the history of the United States. And we are a new country. We haven't been around for, that long, but long enough that, you could have seen something like this before. This is the first time that this fact pattern has ever been alleged. And it is what we would need to know to convict, for a conviction to be garnered in this case. But if the former president did in fact know that what he was saying was not true, as William Barr said last night on CNN,
yeah.
I mean, that is so troubling. I mean, that is exactly the opposite of the United States Constitution and the oath of the presidency.
Well, this has been that was a very different presidency than many in the past. And there's a lot to be said about that. Let's talk about the courtroom. Looks like the hearing is going to be taking place in a courtroom that's normally used by the district court's chief judge. And the reason why is because it's wired in a way that allows for closed circuit video. People need to be able to see this. And so the news media, the public, they'll be able to see that there, because not everybody can fit in that courtroom.
That's correct. They'll put overflow citizens, reporters, people who want to see it into other courtrooms, and they'll be able to see the proceedings from inside that courtroom.
Do we know where the former president is right now? Do we know if he has been? It looks like he entered from what I'm understanding.
It's like he went down a parking ramp underneath the building.
Yeah, it looks like there was an underground garage entrance, is what the Washington Post is reporting, that he entered through that underground garage entrance. You know this building.
I do know this building.
Okay.
I've gone through that entrance.
You know the entrance. So, okay.
I do.
That happened about 10, 11 minutes ago. Where is he now, you think?
So he is being fingerprinted,
okay,
or he has just completed the fingerprint process. It's very quick. It's, you no longer do the ink pads anymore. It's just electronic. They've taken electronic fingerprints, and then they would send him upstairs to the magistrate judge.
Let's talk about the magistrate judge, too, because there's two judges here. There's a judge today, but also a judge that will be seeing the case. And so I want to know a little bit about Tanya Chutkan. She's the U.S. District Judge who will be overseeing the trial, not today, but the trial itself. And she was randomly assigned to this case, I'm hearing.
That is correct. Judges are assigned, I think we talked about this at one of the past times I've been on. Judges are assigned in sort of a wheel-like system, so it's totally anonymous. They pick the judge that has the open calendar, and in whatever wheel or however they spin this wheel. Actually, some courthouses actually have a wheel. I don't know if they do that anymore.
Like the Wheel of Fortune or something.
And that's how the assignments are made. I don't know if they have a wheel in this courthouse anymore, but it is a total random assignment. You do not get to pick your judge in the United States.
You don't get to pick your judge.
You don't. It's an important part of our judicial system.
Now, this judge, Tanya Chutkan, she was appointed by President Obama.
That's correct.
She's been on the bench for about a decade. And what do we know about how she does she rule in a heavy-handed type of way? Is she give light sentences?
She is a former public defender with the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia. She is very, very well regarded. She is known to run a very above board, a very tight courtroom. She makes very thoughtful decisions in her cases. She's somebody that people say you get a fair trial in front of. She is somebody that across the board, if you're convicted in her courtroom, she is known to give out harsher sentences than some other judges, to be a little bit heavy-handed with the sentences. But that's not just you hear a lot lately with her about Trump January 6th protesters and rioters, and some of the sentences that she's given is heavy-handed. But I think that's everybody, regardless of your political affiliation. If you're convicted in her courtroom, you will be sentenced in a very sort of heavy fashion.
And what I know from doing some research is that in 2021, she rejected Trump's request to stop the January 6th House Committee from getting some White House documents related to the riot. So she has had some ruling in relation to the former president before.
She did, and she said in that ruling, and I'm not quoting her, I don't remember the exact quote, but basically said these documents have to go over to the House Committee because even the president isn't above the law. And so I think that is, I imagine she's going to carry that through, and she will treat him just like she treats every other defendant in her courtroom. She's known as a very fair judge and treats and gives defendants a very fair trial.
So I want to also just kind of do a little reset for the people at home. You're watching Local News Live. I'm Deborah Alfarone, and I'm also joined by former federal prosecutor Peggy Bennett, chatting, of course, about the news of the day,
yes.
The big news of the day, a historic day, former President Trump here in Washington, D.C., not too far from where we're sitting right now, actually.
Blocks away.
Mere blocks away. Let's give a little bit of a background. We have one of our correspondents, Washington Bureau correspondent Ryan Henson, who has put together basically what we need to know today. So we'd like to play that for you now, and then we're going to join back up in a couple of seconds.
Former President Donald Trump is indicted on 4 conspiracy counts for his role in attempting to overturn the 2020 election and to undercut American democracy.
As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies.
The charges: obstruction of an official proceeding, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, conspiracy to defraud the U.S. government, and conspiracy to prevent others from carrying out their constitutional rights.
Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election.
Prosecutors say the conspiracy organized fake electors, fueled claims of election fraud, used the Justice Department to do sham election investigations, and attempt to force former Vice President Mike Pence to falsely alter results and stoke the tension of the January 6th insurrection. Smith says his team is committed to a fair and speedy trial, especially as the 2024 presidential election race heats up. The felony charges are built around the words of White House lawyers and others in his inner circle who repeatedly told Trump there was no fraud.
What we have now is an administration that has criminalized the free speech and advocacy of a prior administration during the time that there is a political election going on.
Trump is the only defendant, but he has 6 yet to be named co-conspirators. His defense team is expected to argue that Trump truly believed the election was stolen, and he has a First Amendment right to express his thoughts. The former president's first appearance in court is on Thursday. In Washington, I'm Ryan Henson.
And that first appearance is tick-tocking away, less
Very
than a
true.
half hour. Yeah. A lot of things going on today. Again, we're here because there is this historic arraignment that's going to take place today. 4 felony charges. You're looking live right now to pictures outside of the D.C. courthouse. This is the federal courthouse on Constitution Avenue. I want to talk a little bit about something that I found interesting to get your feedback too. So some polls. There are some polls happening this week. A New York Times Siena College poll shows that if there was a rematch held today between the former president and President Biden, it would be a tie amongst registered voters. This is actually a poll from earlier this week. So when I say rematch today, it's not today, it's earlier this week. But still, I mean, the indictment came out on Tuesday. So that's interesting. And the former president, former President Trump dominating his rivals, really, for the Republican nomination. I know that if you are involved in many legal situations, it's not going to mean that you can't run for president. what would happen if he was, I mean, I know I'm going way down the road here, but let's say, can you be, and maybe you don't have the answer to this, I don't know, but I'm gonna put you on the spot here. I mean, if you, let's say he is the president and then he is convicted, what happens? I know, like,
Well, it'd be
it's a lot of stuff.
unprecedented. I mean, you can have a criminal record and be the president of the United States. There's no bar to that. I think you'd get into so many difficult issues with, I mean, your security clearance. I mean, things that are affected by criminal convictions. You know, you can't have a high security. If you're convicted of a conspiracy, you certainly can't have a high security clearance. So how would that affect the material? Does the president does the president not have to have a security clearance? I mean, all these sort of auxiliary issues would come in, or, you know, that I don't think anyone's ever had to answer, because we've never been in this situation before.
We find ourselves in uncharted territory here.
We do find ourselves in uncharted territory. I think, you know, how is he going to run for re-election and be able to dedicate time to his campaign while also defending himself in 3 separate indictments around the country, in Florida, New York, and this newest federal indictment in Washington, D.C. That's a lot of time. That's a lot of money on attorneys. That's you know, he's not, you know, I mean, how is that going to affect his day-to-day life?
And it is, of course, important to note that he has pled not guilty for many of these cases and is expected to plead not guilty today. He is, you know, obviously, these are all alleged crimes at this point. I just wonder, you know, how, it's interesting you're saying, oh, it doesn't preclude you from being the president of the United States, but if you have a conviction, there's many things that you cannot do.
That's correct.
There's a lot of things you can't do in this world and a lot of jobs that you can't have, but that one, that's okay. I mean, what is that all about? But anyway, going back to those polls, I do want to bring up another poll. There is a new CNN poll out today that a majority of Republicans actually believe what the former president has alleged, that there was widespread voter fraud and that he actually won the election. We know that, of course, that is not true. There's no evidence of that. But this new poll says that a majority of Republicans believe those lies, showing 69% of Republicans and Republican-leaning voters say President Biden's win was not legitimate.
I would be interested to see those polls again as this case goes forward and evidence comes to light. I think that there are going to be many people who are involved in this case who are respected Republican leaders that perhaps some of the former President Trump's supporters trust and believe. And perhaps when they are able to, when more evidence comes out, when there's more sort of to flush out the indictment, I wonder if public perception will change. I mean, as a special counsel said at his press conference, you know, the former president is innocent until proven guilty. And it'll be interesting to see, as the facts come out, will the polls change? Will people say, well, you know, I believe that person who's saying this, and that does make sense, or not?
Just a couple of more updates here, Peggy, as I'm just checking the wires here and checking what's going on as we're sitting here taking a live look at the E. Barrett Prettyman United States Courthouse, the federal courthouse in which right now former President Trump is inside, getting ready to be arraigned for those 4 felony charges. Just a couple of things I'm reading here. The New York Times reporting that this is kind of an unusual move on an unusual day. The district court's chief judge, James Boasberg, am I saying his name right? He entered the courtroom and is going to watch the proceedings as a spectator. Okay. Another thing that we're learning here is that there is some reading material that the Trump team has handed out to reporters who are traveling with his motorcade. And really, the theme of this is trying to portray those indictments as part of a sinister scheme by the deep state.
Well, I think, you know, that is not surprising. You know, as we saw when the former president had his arraignment in Miami and he stopped at a restaurant and gave a press conference afterwards, he uses these arraignments as a press tour, and, you know, and make statements at them in some way, whether it's by handing out material, by speaking. So that's not unusual to me. The Chief Judge Boasberg watching it, that is also not unusual to me. I would expect that the Chief Judge would, in fact, want to see what is happening in his courthouse.
Again, if you're just joining us, Local News Live, we're here covering the historic arraignment of former President Trump. He's expected to answer to those 4 felony charges. And really what it comes down to is the indictment says that it alleges that he knowingly lied and
what
conspired.
Did he know? What did he know? And who's going to say
Yeah, I mean, what did he know? And
when did he know it? And
Right.
who told it to him? And what did he do after he knew the information?
Right.
And that's really what this is going to turn on. Before, he tried to interfere with Georgia, did he know that those electors were fake? Did he know that? Who told him that? What did he do once he learned it? Those are all factual questions that are really going to chip away at the truth of the indictment.
And there's a couple of other parts of this indictment. Another just detail in the indictment is that he alleged that there were so many people who were dead voters who voted, and there was no evidence of that. And Brad Raffensperger had said that this is not true. And this continued to perpetrate and continue to talk about.
It did. And when did the former president learn that wasn't true? When was he first told, no, you can't say that. That's not accurate. We don't have anything to support that. And I think another thing that will be fleshed out here that is important for people to see and will definitely be part of any trial is all the collateral damage on the people's lives who were just sort of career workers, election workers, people certifying the electoral votes in Georgia. Their lives, they had death threats. They were, their lives were turned upside down just for speaking the truth about what they were observing and what they were seeing with no political agenda.
And if you think about all the people who were at the Capitol that day on January 6th, whose lives are forever changed, some of them experiencing violence that, has taken a hold of them, and just either they have PTSD, they can't come back to work, or they have physical ailments. Many of them were hurt. Many police officers were hurt very badly that day, and we lost Officer Brian Sicknick as a result of that day as well. I'm looking at the indictment, just a couple of things that stand out here. Here it is on the first page. Despite having lost, the defendant, of course, we're talking about former President Donald Trump, was determined to remain in power. So for more than 2 months following Election Day, on November 3rd, 2020, the defendant spread lies that there had been outcome determinative fraud in the election and that he had actually won. These claims were false, and the defendant knew that they were false. So if I'm reading this and I'm seeing that, I'm thinking they have evidence that shows that will prove that he knew that this was false. And again, it goes back to, you can say whatever you like to say, but this was said as part of a conspiracy, is what this document is alleging.
Well, it's true. The former president, like every American, they say it in paragraph 3 of the indictment, where it, quote, says, the defendant had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and even to claim falsely there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election and that he had won. But then if you go to paragraph number 4, it talks about how the defendant pursued unlawful means of discounting legitimate votes and subverting the election results. That's not free speech. You know, when it goes from free speech of sort of saying, well, I was the winner, I should have won, to actually using the free speech it's just two different things. It's, you have free speech, and then you are saying things and subverting outcomes and saying things that aren't true, and engaging in this conspiracy to overturn a legal election. And that's what is the crux of this indictment. It's not about free speech. It's about the steps that the president used and what he said to try to subvert the election. And those are two incredibly different things.
It kind of points to the eroding of public trust in elections as well. It looks like here a conspiracy against the right to vote and have one's vote counted is one of the things that they're alleging, that this language kind of perpetrated on the American people. And if you think about, of course, like we were saying before about the poll in which almost 70% of Republicans rather are believing that there was outcome determinative fraud and that Trump won the election.
Yes.
then you can see how this played into people's minds. It wasn't just someone lying and saying, "Oh, well, the sky is green." No, people then, as they're polled later, are believing this and holding this as truth.
Well, it's making up facts and making up, things that occurred that didn't occur, like the people who supposedly voted who were not alive or were underage or didn't have a right to vote, and there was just no evidence of that. And from what we're learning, the former president had been told that there was no evidence of that, and even knowing that, even hearing from people in the know that that was the case, he still went on to say it and to take action to try to stop the election based on something that he knew wasn't true.
This is interesting in the indictment. I just want to read a little bit to you here as we are looking at, of course, the E. Barrett Prettyman United States Courthouse. So this is in the indictment. The defendant, his co-conspirators, and their agents made knowingly false claims, again, that there had been this outcome, determinative fraud, and the 2020 presidential election. And then it goes on to say, these prolific lies about election fraud included dozens of specific claims that there had been substantial fraud in certain states. Large numbers of dead, non-resident, non-citizen, or otherwise ineligible voters had cast ballots. That was one of the lies. Or that voting machines had changed votes for the defendant to votes for Biden. These claims were false, and the defendant knew that they were false. So we have this in black and white. This is in writing. This is the indictment. This is why we're here today. This is why we're looking at this courthouse today. But still, 70% of people are saying, well, I believe what the former president said.
That's correct. And I think as this case goes through the court system and as more facts come to light, I think it'd be very interesting to run that poll again and see what people think.
Right. It's really, I mean, if you've got a chance to read this 45-page document, I mean, it's pretty interesting stuff, for sure. Let's talk a little bit about where we are right now. Okay, so it is about 3:52 p.m.
Yeah.
The former president is supposed to be arraigned at 4 p.m. It could be a little bit before, it could be a little bit after. He's in the courthouse, we know. What happens, or we've got 4 different felony charges. There's been other types of arraignments where there are 30-plus charges. There's just 4
correct.
here. Does that mean it's going to go quicker? Does that mean this is less of a consequential case? I'm thinking not.
No, it definitely does not mean that it's less of a consequential case. Quantity doesn't necessarily, mean quality, although the other matters are incredibly important as well. But no, it does not mean that this is not an important case. And in many ways that we've talked about today, this is sort of all of them, not that you want to rate, indictments, but this is sort of the most serious one. I mean, this is the one that really goes to the bedrock of our Constitution.
Well, let's take a little bit of a break and we'll come back because there's a lot more. We haven't even scratched the surface with this. There's a lot more to talk about, and certainly the former president is inside that courthouse. So we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit more. You're watching Local News Live. Welcome back to Local News Live. Some other headlines that we're following today. $4 million. That's how much the family of a man who they say was eaten alive while in an Atlanta jail will receive. LaShawn Johnson died in custody in September 2022. He was held for 3 months in a psychiatric wing on a misdemeanor battery charge. His family says the jail noticed his deteriorating condition but did nothing. Thompson's family says the settlement speaks for itself.
Right now, the FBI is searching for more potential victims. This is after a violent sex assault and kidnapping case that stretched from Seattle to Oregon. Now, they believe the suspect, who lived in 10 states over 10 years, may have inflicted violence on others. KPTV's Adrian Thomas has the latest.
According to an unsealed criminal complaint from the FBI, this is the house and garage where suspect, 29-year-old Negasi Zaberi, allegedly held a woman captive in his garage in a makeshift cell after allegedly kidnapping her in Seattle. A short time ago, we encountered a woman at this house who said she was the mother of Zaberi's children and was in Nevada. She denies the allegations being made by the FBI and said she and her children are still living in the house and are safe. Some neighbors are still trying to wrap their heads around all that has happened. According to the FBI complaint, the kidnapping happened in the early hours of July 15th. Disturbing photos released by the FBI show what appears to be a makeshift cinder block cell in the garage of this unassuming house in Klamath Falls. A woman claiming to be the mother of Zaberi's children, who is still living at the house, showed us what was inside the garage, and the structure seen in these photos from the FBI was nowhere to be found. It's unclear at this time if the structure was removed by law enforcement or someone else living in the house. In the FBI's criminal complaint, it states law enforcement obtained a search warrant for the house on July 16th. Lee Ashford, who lives just a block away, says at the time he and other neighbors didn't know what was happening.
We didn't know if it was FBI or state police or what, but they were here pretty much all day. Obviously something was going on. And it was, we speculated along with everybody else we talked to, but didn't really know anything.
Ashford says there was zero indication there were any issues and that the charges from the FBI are shocking.
Stuff happens everywhere, behind closed doors. Who knows what's going on?
Civil court documents in Klamath County that we've obtained show that Negasi Zaberi is actually renting this house from a couple that lives just a block or two from here, and the couple's name is Carol and Kevin Westfall. A spokesperson for the Klamath Falls Police Department has confirmed with us that Carol Westfall is actually the mayor of Klamath Falls. The Westfalls sent us a statement which reads in part, quote, "We are shocked and dismayed by what has occurred. We applaud the actions of this woman in helping capture this person and preventing him from committing further atrocities. We commend the work of the Klamath Falls Police Department, Oregon State Patrol, and the FBI on this case. We encourage anyone with information about this situation to notify the proper authorities." Now, again, the mother of Zaberi's children is still living in the house at this time. She didn't want to go on camera with us, and she says that they all moved here back in February. In Klamath Falls, Oregon, Adrian Thomas, Local News Live.
What happened to Alicia Watts? She's a woman from North Carolina who's been missing since July 16th. New court documents may reveal Thanks for joining us on Local News Live. I'm Deborah Alfarone. We're just going to give you a quick update right now. You can see live pictures. This is in Washington, D.C., where former President Trump is being arraigned right now in a courtroom in D.C., the federal courthouse. And so we are learning a little bit about what's going on there. We're going to continue to follow this. Of course, these are those 4 felony counts related to his efforts to knowingly lie about the 2020 election. That's what the indictment alleges. We do have reporters in and around the courthouse, and we will continue to update you. But for right now, the former president is being arraigned in a U.S. federal courthouse in Washington, D.C. We'll have more for you later on. But for now, this is Local News Live. headlines that we're following today. $4 million. That's how much the family of a man who they say was eaten alive by bed bugs while in an Atlanta jail will receive. LaShawn Johnson died in custody in September 2022. He was held for 3 months in a psychiatric wing on a misdemeanor battery charge. His family says the jail noticed his deteriorating condition but did nothing. Thompson's family says the settlement speaks for itself.
Right now, the FBI is searching for more potential victims. This is after a violent sex assault and kidnapping case that stretched from Seattle to Oregon. Now, they believe the suspect, who lived in 10 states over 10 years, may have inflicted violence on others. KPTV's Adrian Thomas has the latest.
According to an unsealed criminal complaint from the FBI, this is the house and garage where the suspect, 29-year-old Nagasi Zaberi, allegedly held a woman captive in his garage after allegedly kidnapping her in Seattle. A short time ago, we encountered a woman at this house who said she was the mother of Zaberi's children and was with him when he was arrested in Nevada. She denies the allegations being made by the FBI and said she and her children are still living in the house and are safe. Some neighbors are still trying to wrap their heads around all that has happened. According to the FBI complaint, the kidnapping happened in the early hours of July 15th. Disturbing photos released by the FBI show what appears to be a makeshift cinder block cell in the garage of this unassuming house in Klamath Falls. A woman claiming to be the mother of Zaberi's children, who is still living at the house, showed us what was inside the garage, and the structure seen in these photos from the FBI was nowhere to be found. It's unclear at this time if the structure was removed by law enforcement or someone else living in the house. In the FBI's criminal complaint, it states law enforcement obtained a search warrant for the house on July 16th. Lee Ashford, who lives just a block away, says at the time he and other neighbors didn't know what was happening.
We didn't know if it was FBI or state police or what, but they were here pretty much all day. Obviously something was going on. And it was, we speculated along with everybody else we talked to, but didn't really know anything.
Ashford says there was zero indication there were any issues and that the charges from the FBI are shocking.
Stuff happens everywhere, behind closed doors. Who knows what's going on?
Civil court documents in Klamath County that we've obtained show that Nagasi Zaberi is actually renting this house from a couple that lives just a block or two from here, and the couple's name is Carol and Kevin Westfall. A spokesperson for the Klamath Falls Police Department has confirmed with us that Carol Westfall is actually the mayor of Klamath Falls. The Westfall sent us a statement which reads in part, quote, "We are shocked and dismayed by what has occurred. We applaud the actions of this woman in helping capture this person and preventing him from committing further atrocities. We commend the work of the Klamath Falls Police Department, Oregon State Patrol, and the FBI on this case. We encourage anyone with information about this situation to notify the proper authorities." Now, again, the mother of Zaberi's children is still living in the house at this time. She didn't want to go on camera with us, and she says that they all moved here back in February. In Klamath Falls, Oregon, Adrian Thomas, Local News Live.
What happened to Alicia Watts? She's a woman from North Carolina who's been missing since July 16th. New court documents may reveal new clues. Watts was last seen at her boyfriend's home in Charlotte, North Carolina on July 16th, and now her disappearance is being investigated as a possible murder. Last week, police searched his home, that's the boyfriend's home, for evidence, taking clothing, cell phones, a laptop, and other items for forensic investigation. A search warrant also details that Alicia's phone, her boyfriend's phone, and her SUV all stayed at his home for 2 days until July 18th, when Alicia's boyfriend was found unconscious in her car from what police say was an attempted suicide attempt.
We are relieved that it's out. We're very thankful because initially upon our press conference, we were aware that this had something to do with domestic violence. We were aware that she was in danger. We were aware that we needed to speak to someone. So hopefully by this information being revealed to media, we are hoping that detectives and law enforcement speak clearly to the family members of what's going on.
Our Charlotte station, WBTV, has continued to ask police if Watts' boyfriend is a person of interest. They've not heard back.
Well, it has been nearly a week since 18